What's going on, FA Nation? Welcome to FA Sports Talk. I am Dan Malin, and I am joined by Fantasy Alarm's resident cornerman, Mike Alexander. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Dan. How you doing this week?
Doing really well. Very excited for the UFC 250 card on Saturday. We're coming off the heels of a really successful MMA DFS playbook from last week's UFC Fight Night. How did you turn out? I know I had a really good night. I tripled my money. I know a lot of our subs had really good nights, and the Fantasy Alarm DFS DraftKings count took down 25 grand. So how'd you do?
Yeah, did pretty good myself. It was one of those weird nights where you had so many 100-point scores, you felt like you were doing great and you should win all the money, but you just won some of the money.
Right. So we've seen a couple UFC cards that have fights canceled or it gets down to 10 or 11 fights, and those make it pretty tough for DFS. Right now, we're slated for 12 fights. How confident are you that we won't lose any fights? Everything should go off as planned.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of risk that we're going to lose a fight. Not any more than a regular card. And, typically they're carrying 13 fights and you might go to 12. So here we're at 12 and might go to 11. But, we've been having 10 and 11 lately down in Jacksonville. So I'm pretty happy with 12. They're going to do their damn best to make sure fights get, made if anybody misses weight. So the real only risk, I think, is any COVID-19 positive tests. And at this point, it seems like people, are staying in the right lane. They know how to train and stay healthy and make it to the fight without any issues there.
All right, so let's talk a little more about UFC 250 this weekend. We don't have the playbook out just yet, but what kind of research can we do ahead of time to kind of familiarize ourselves? One thing I really like to do is I like to put, a face to every name that's on this list. I'll go into YouTube and I'll try to find the last few fights for each fighter. I like to kind of see how long their arms are, what kind of grappling they can do, how their ground game is as well. Mm-hmm. Are they a knockout specialist? What can we do right now just to get ahead of the curve?
Yeah, so in the playbook, you can see how do they typically finish a fight. You'll see their wins by submission, wins by knockout, and decisions. So that kind of gives you a flavor. Odds are a really good thing to look at. Vegas is better than anybody, generally speaking, when it comes to what's going to happen in a sporting event. So you can look at inside the distance. That means, is it going to end before the final round is finished?
With a knockout or submission?
Yeah, with a knockout or submission, or a DQ in the rare circumstance. And then, you can also, as the week progresses, you can see the odds on a knockout itself, a submission itself. So, if you think it's a guy that is a submission specialist and it's, minus odds to win by submission, that's a really likely thing to happen. Usually by knockout or by submission are plus odds. So if you're seeing it in the minus, that's a good thing to go and look out. You mentioned watching the fights. The average person's not going to go and grind a fighter's full tape.
I get that.
You can get a UFC TV subscription. It's not a huge chunk. You can find it out there online as well for no cost. But a good thing to do is to spend your time wisely. So ask somebody like me or on Twitter. There's a big MMA community. Just say, this guy's fighting fighter X. Who are some other guys he's fought that are in that same kind of mold? Rafael Asunciao's fighting Cody Garbrandt. Who are some guys he's fought like that previously? Maybe Marlon Moraes would be an example. You might want to go watch that fight. Moraes is an explosive striker. So things like that.
Okay, awesome. And I know weigh-ins are typically later in the week. They're usually 24 to 48 hours before. Is there anything big we can really take away from those aside from guys that may have gone in that may weigh in a little bit overweight as in kind of a struggle to get down to weight? I mean, can we expect those guys maybe to just struggle a little bit in the fight if that happens?
Yeah, for me, I try to stay I try not to let the weigh-ins bias my previous opinions. If somebody looks really, really bad, we've seen some fighters just not even be able to stand on the scale. All right, that's a special circumstance. We don't really want to go heavy on that fighter probably. But you still don't want to take them out of your pool because we have seen fighters look like death on the scales, rehydrate, and bounce back the next day. There's no discernible edge. It's about 50-50 when a fighter misses weight, whether they win or lose. So that's what, for me, I try not to be biased by that. You might be a little more cautious if somebody misses weight bad or looks really bad. If they're in your core, knock your shares down a little bit. But, people will give you all kinds of theories that if they missed it by a lot, then they didn't try, and that's good. If they miss it by like a pound, then they really tried, but they couldn't get there and they killed themselves. But if they come in overweight, they're going to have that weight advantage against their opponent. So there's all kinds of theories, but nothing pans out in my opinion.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit of lineup construction. We know that stacking is a pretty popular strategy, especially in cash games. Is the main event of this fight, do you see it as being a more stackable fight? You've got one fighter that's heavily favored against a fighter that's under 7K on DraftKings right now. So aside of stacking and cash, are there any big differences in lineup construction between cash games and GPP contests?
As far as differences, there is, when it comes to safety, like Caitlin Chikagian last week, I was fairly confident she was going to win. I did not think she was going to exceed 70 points.
It was dominant.
Yeah, that was the first time she showed any wrestling. It was very smart. Her opponent had a major hole in her defensive grappling, trained it, and went out and executed it. And that's very rare. You don't see MMA fighters get out of their lane like that. If they're a striker, they're trying to win the fight via striking. If they're a wrestler, that's their base. But so I included her in some cash lineups, but avoided her, on the most part for GPPs because I didn't think she had the upside. Turns out she did. But generally that kind of fighter. This week, Rafael Asunciao is that kind of guy. Even in a win, 70, 75 points is kind of his ceiling. That's just not going to get it done probably in a GPP. You need that dog that goes off for 85, 95 points. Getting to the main event, is this stackable? In the playbook each week, I will rate the main event on stackability. Either
it's very useful.
Yeah, either risky, moderate, or stackably safe. This week, it's probably going to be a medium risk. I think Felicia Spencer does have the toughness to go the full 5 or, close to it. She lasted 3 rounds with Christine Cyborg, who has destroyed every person who's gotten into a cage with her besides Amanda Nunes, who's the greatest women's fighter of all time. So she's got the toughness. She's a BJJ specialist. So her getting subbed is not going to happen quickly in all likelihood. So this fight should go on. And the reasons to stack there's a few of them. Number one, you're trying to guarantee yourself that win bonus. The fighter who wins a 5-round fight is generally going to approach 100 points. The other fighter hopefully has some stats, and you're looking at like a 120, a 130 between them. You still want to have the other side get you that, though. If the other side, like last week's main event between Woodley and Burns, we knew Woodley, if he didn't win in the first or second round, his value would be extremely, extremely low. So that was not a stackable fight at all, and it was labeled as such in the playbook. It was risky. This one, I think Spencer could answer back. I think she could get a little bit of grappling of her own. So she can give you 20, 30 points in a loss if it's 4 or 5 rounds. And then the last reason for stacking is you're trying to save salary. On a pay-per-view card, it's really tough to pick dogs. They're just, the fights are, hard to predict. And being able to have a guaranteed win, hopefully 130 points, like I said, and save that salary, that's going to do a lot for you in being able to pay up for more predictable fighters.
Awesome. All right. And do you have any other pointers for possibly identifying value on the sites? I know one guy I've been looking at, just doing some early research, is going to be Brian Kelleher. For his last 2 fights, he's been priced under 8,000, and he's won both, and neither of them had to go the distance. That's one guy that I'm kind of looking at. I understand he may still be a bit of a risk in cash, but are there any other value plays that just kind of jump off the page at you?
Yeah, Asunciao and Kelleher, and that's a sharp point there, Dan. And Stamen doesn't really finish fights. He's kind of a grinder. So Kelleher is in that kind of same mold. He's a guy that's going to push and try and exhaust you. But despite some recent finishes, there's a good chance this fight goes to decision. So that's a fairly safe haven in a cash game, to be able to pay down. A good thing to look for is typically a women's fight under 7K. They just don't have the same finish rate. especially the lighter weight classes. If it's not somebody who's facing a submission specialist like we saw last week with Mackenzie Dern, yes, she's got world-class BJJ. She could end that fight in a heartbeat. But typically they're going to go to a decision if you can get the 30 points out of somebody with some striking volume and a little grappling. That's what you're looking for. So Kelleher fits that mold. Asuncia's a little riskier, given that Cody Garbrandt, when he does win, it's because he just blitzes people and is able to knock them out. His best days are behind him, though, and I don't think he's that fighter anymore, especially if he gets clipped at all on the way back. So I think Asuncia has a little bit of upside, but is a fairly safe bet. People are kind of down on him right now, but he used to be and may still be one of the best in the division.
Okay. Now, we've mostly been talking DraftKings, but FanDuel a couple weeks ago, they introduced UFC DFS. Are you playing any FanDuel? I have not played it yet. Well, I've played a little bit, but I haven't played it nearly as much as I normally play DraftKings. I typically try to avoid slates where an MVP spot is involved. I think it creates too much variance, but I understand that, with UFC and MMA, when you only have at best 24 fighters to choose from, the MVP slot creates a little more variance. But are you playing any FanDuel this week?
Yeah, I've picked back up on there. FanDuel hasn't always been my favorite site, but I built a little bit of a bankroll out of some money I had left in the account. And, I do like for MMA, the captain slot is an intriguing thing because, not only are you picking some fighters that you think are going to do well, you're putting a stamp on the person you think who will do the best. And if you've got 12 fights, that's 12 winners. Out of those, probably 7 or 8 are going to be usable in the winning GPP lineup. So you've got a really narrow target. Adding that captain slot does make it a little more interesting.
All right. And let's talk a little contest selection. I know UFC is running basically their first ever Millionaire Maker for UFC 250 this weekend. $25 entry. Now, that's a little high for me. I do like to max enter contests that are within, my bankroll, my means of playing. So I love the Haymaker. It's $3, 20 entry max, $60 to max enter. Level playing field with everybody else. Everyone else is just throwing in 20 entries. What kind of contest do you prefer to play in?
Yeah, that's a great one, the Haymaker, for guys, who have a smaller bankroll or dipping their feet into the MMA waters, don't want to go nuts. The 20 entries does make it, like you said, level playing field. You're not fighting against somebody who can just churn out 150 lineups. It's a nice price point. They typically offer a higher one as well, a $20 20 max. I'll try to get in that one and max enter as well when I can. I'm not sure if that's out this week or not. We'll see what happens. But when you look at MMA in general, it's such a unique DFS landscape. You've got 2 fighters that you can use, but only one of them is going to win. And 99 times out of 100, that means only one of them is going to hit the value you need to have a winning lineup. And you're generally going to need 6 of them. Once in a while you can skate by with a loss and just hit the min cash, or have something crazy happen where it's a 5-round fight and it's just stats galore and the loser can exceed value with like 75 points. But you're looking for winners. So that means, if your fighter wins, the other fighter loses, and anyone who rostered that other fighter has now just had their legs chopped out. It's really hard to go 6 for 6 though, and do that while staying under a salary cap.
Now, how comfortable are you playing cash games? I typically, for MMA, I'll only play the single entry cash game contest. I get a little weary, especially in MMA, doing multi-entry cash games. But how confident are you in cash games? Because I've had a lot more success with GPPs for MMA than I have for cash games. Now, that changed last week because last week's playbook had every fight picked correctly. So building cash lineups was pretty easy last week. But typically, I kind of play cash games pretty light.
I've gotten pretty good at building cash games. When I first started playing MMA DFS, I'm not ashamed to admit I was not good at MMA cash games. But I've developed a knack for it, being able to pick fights with low risk, and being able to pick the right stacks. So, for myself, I think I've gotten pretty good at it. For the average player, somebody who's not an MMA fanatic, it's a bigger challenge than say an NFL or a NASCAR cash lineup, where you've got more predictability. You've got some stats, some things that can give you a better idea of what's going to happen. It's DFS. Anything can happen in any sport, but MMA is kind of the Wild West. There's like I said, there's the rare DQ. You've got early knockouts, early submissions, fighters who just don't show up. And it's really hard to peg things. So cash may not be for everyone. This week with the Millie Maker, you may want to just take a shot at that if you're trying to hit it big. I'd rather see people have a chance to win real money if they're going to go 6 for 6, because even in cash, 5 out of 6 will win you most of your cash lineups, but really you need to be 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6. If you're going to do that, let's see if you can win the whole thing in a GPP rather than dedicate it into a cash lineup.
So if you had $300, how much would you put in cash games and how much would you put in GPPs?
Yeah, slightly less than what you usually would in cash. If you're somebody who does 3-to-1 cash to GPPs, then maybe 2-to-1 or 1-to-1. Like I said, with the 6 for 6 thing, there's very, very slight differences between the winning GPP lineup and one that's, just in the middle of the cash lines.
Right.
You just have to find that one person who goes off. Last week, it was Chris Gutierrez at $8,300. He happened to be one of my core plays in my personal lineups, in the 20 entry maxes. So I had him in probably 16 of my 20 lineups. So right there, I was 16 of my lineups were live at the beginning of the night to win it all, because 120 is a huge score for somebody at 8,300. Now,
Are the fighters in the 8K range, are those harder to read? I mean, I understand like they are closer together in prices, so it's more of a toss-up. And I've edited some of the Cornerman videos as well. But are typically those $8,000-ish fighters, are those the ones that'll kind of make or break your slate?
Yeah, all of DraftKings pricing is based on Vegas odds. So absolutely, that's where you've probably got to make your bread and butter. Once in a while, you do see an underdog go nuts and score, a 90 or 100 plus points. But this week, that Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen, that's the one you probably have to get right to win a GPP. I don't see anybody playing a lineup without one of those guys. In all likelihood, they fit well, and they can both just really score a ton of stats. Even in a 3-round decision, they can probably hit 95, 100 points. So, but that's a really hard fight to predict because they're both really good fighters and right at the edge of title contention. And, the guy who loses is going to kill your lineup. The guy who wins is going to make your lineup.
Awesome. All right. Now, is there anything else you wanted to tout, promote, push? As it's a big week for the UFC. We're pushing out more content. Mike and I are going to be doing a podcast that'll be out later this week. Is there anything else you personally wanted to touch on?
Yeah, the playbooks is that's your resource. You guys for NASCAR do a great job, and I've kind of modeled myself after that. Just kind of lays it out for you. That's going to build it. Hit me with any questions in the chat on Fantasy Alarm. Reach out to me on Twitter, whatever. Because sometimes reading the playbook, you can get down the wrong path. You might say, oh, you said this guy has high upside. Should I put him in my cash lineup? Probably not, because he's probably going to get knocked out. But he could always turn the tide. And then if you're looking to wager at all, I do stuff on Wager Alarm as well. I include my favorite bets. Had a pretty good year so far. I include usually 5 or 6 bets. I'm hitting most of them this year, and that's pretty rare on the betting front. So.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you for your time. Best of luck to you, and best of luck to the FA Nation this weekend for UFC 250.